Good morning.
Good morning.
As I was looking at our scripture this morning in Luke chapter 9, starting with verse 28, and as I was looking at this passage and kind of going over it, at first I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, maybe I better include the next story too, because this isn't very much material. And the more I looked at it, the more it was like, I don't think I'm going to get all of this in 1 week. So we might have a 2-hour sermon today. No, I'm just kidding. I will keep it short. But seriously, it seems like sometimes that the material just kind of unfolds and you start seeing the story and you start realizing the importance of it. And then all of a sudden it's like it just comes to life. And that's the way this one was to me. So I just want to read through it and then we're going to go back and look at it. About 8 days after Jesus said this, which, by the way, what he said was, I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James and went up onto the mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory, and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. Now, if we were in a class situation, I would ask you a question, and that question would be, what jumps off the page at you? And the reason I do that is because sometimes you guys see things and stuff that I don't see, but since we're not in a class situation, I'm just going to expound on this, all right? So what jumped off the page at me? So, why these 2 men? Why Peter, James, and John? Why Elijah and Moses and Jesus? Why did they glow? It says the glory was upon them. We know from other experiences that means that they are bright and shining. We also see in Matthew the same story recorded, and it says that he was so bright, brighter than anything, brighter than the sun. And here he describes the lightning. But I begin asking these questions. Why did he take Peter, James, and John? Now, in the previous chapter, we saw that he also took Peter, James, and John into Jairus' daughter when his daughter had died. And Jesus took Peter, James, and John and went in and raised this girl from the dead. Why Peter, James, and John? And most people would assume that this means that Peter, James, and John was the inner circle, and I believe that too. But it also could be that they were the troublemakers and he was trying to keep them out of trouble. So you guys come with me. I'll take care of you guys. But whatever it is, Peter, James, and John is with Jesus. And he's singled them out to experience something. Now, what has happened just before this is Peter has confessed that he believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, the Savior of all mankind. And then Jesus lowers the boom on him, and that is that I am about to die. This is the end. It's coming to the end. And they kind of deny this. They reject it. They're not really happy about this idea. We'll save you. We'll take care of it. Kind of trying to play God. So Peter, James, and John are taken to this mountain with Jesus. And we don't know exactly how it unfolds, but they seem to be in a daze, sleepy, not fully aware, not fully awake. But Jesus is talking to Elijah and to Moses. Now, what do we know about Elijah and Moses? So Moses is the one that led the Israelites out of Egypt. As they're in the desert, he goes up onto a mountain. And as he's up on the mountain talking to God, God gives him these commands. As he comes down, he is glowing so brightly that they cannot look upon his face. So he wears a veil so that the people will be able to look at him and they weren't so afraid. What about Elijah? What do we know about Elijah? Well, we know that Elijah was one of the prophets of old. And we know that he challenged a fight with 850 of the prophets of Baal and Asher by himself. One against 850. Now, that doesn't sound like very good odds to me, but it really wasn't one. It was two. God was with him, and it was God who he was calling upon. And as he asked God for his blessing, God showed his presence. How did he do that? Well, there was 2 altars, and Elijah says, hey, these people are wondering, all of these people around here, they're wondering who really is God. So I want you guys to do me a favor. I want all of the prophets of Baal and Asher to take and build an altar. And on that altar, put an animal, and then call upon your God and see if he will light it on fire. And so they do. All day long, they pray and they chant and they cut themselves. They do all kinds of things to try to get God to hear them. They yell, they scream, they cry. They blow trumpets. They make all of the noise they can. All the while, Elijah's over here. Maybe he's taking a nap. Maybe you should be louder. Maybe he's on vacation, you know. Maybe you should do something else because he's not hearing you guys. Nothing. All day long. Then Elijah says, okay, my turn. Dig a trench around my altar that I built to God and pour water over the top of it. Now, if you're trying to get something to start on fire, water's not the substance that you want to pour all over it. But he saturates it with water, so much so that the trench that is around it is filled with water. And then what does he do? He prays to God and he says, God, show them that you are the one in control. And immediately, fire from heaven lights the altar on fire and the whole thing is consumed at once. Even the water in the trench was licked up. Now, it wasn't very hard to see who God really was. So Elijah was that man that prophesied. He also stood up against Ahab and Jezebel. He also was the one who proclaimed that there would be a drought, and until he prayed again for God to bless them with water, there would be no water. And it happened just as he had told him it would. So you take these 2 men, Moses, who was the one who received the old law and presented that in glowing glory, and Elijah, who shows the power of God through his life and the things that he did. And that those short examples were just a fragment of the things that he did during his life, or that God used him to do during his life. But seeing all of that, then we see this instance with Jesus. Now Jesus goes up onto a mountain, just like Moses did, and he's glowing just like Moses did. And he's showing his power and might, just like Elijah did. And as they're talking, as they're conversing, What are they conversing about? It says that they spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Now, if I wanted somebody to encourage me, to kind of bolster me up, I know this is coming, there's going to be some hard times, who am I going to get? Man, I'd like to have Moses and Elijah by my side, and I'd like for them to come and talk to me. Well, that's exactly what happened. Jesus is standing there talking to Elijah and to Moses. And I don't know what the whole conversation was, but I'm guessing that because they're speaking of his departure, that maybe they're kind of going over the plan that God has laid out one more time, just so that everybody's on the same page. Maybe they're just trying to encourage Jesus. Hold fast. It's almost time. You're going to suffer, but then when you raise again, you will return to heaven and be in your glory once again. All of these things that's going on, and Jesus is standing there with Elijah and Moses, and they're talking and they're sharing about what's about to happen. And then the disciples wake up. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if they were in a daze or if they were sleeping, or, Jesus, when he would pray, oftentimes the disciples would fall asleep. But I'm kind of assuming that this one is that they're in a daze, that they're just kind of not fully awake, not fully there. But then when they do wake up, Peter's first words are, "This is good that we are together." I don't know how they knew who Elijah and Moses were. They lived thousands of years before, but they did. And so somehow they knew who these two men were that were with Jesus, but they were shining, and all of them were shining. But Peter says, it would be good for us to build a shelter, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses. Each one of you have your own shelter. So during the Pentecost, there was 7 days where they would build these shelters, temporary shelters. And these temporary shelters were where they would live, cook, eat, sleep under these temporary shelters. And I believe it had a tie to the Exodus from Egypt, the remembering what had happened. But they were in these, they would build these little temporary shelters, and they would live under these shelters for a week prior to the Pentecost. And so here, this is the example that I think Peter is kind of saying, hey, let's get them to stay. Because it says that as they turned to leave, he says, hey, wouldn't it be good if we just built some shelters here and had them stay? So I think Peter was thinking along these lines, but it says he did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud encompassed them, surrounded them. I kind of think it's fun when you're standing somewhere and the fog settles in, and it just kind of, at first it's just like you can see, cross town or whatever, but then it's like you can only see a couple of blocks, and then pretty soon you can't see the person sitting next to you. Have you ever been in that situation where the fog just kind of settles in? That's kind of a scary but yet exciting feeling, of that happening. And that appears to be what's happened here. As the cloud comes in, though, there's a voice from heaven. And we know it's God because of his words. This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. Now, why did God tell them that? I believe it has to do with what Peter just said. Because Peter says, I want to build these things so that we can spend some more time with them. This is good that they're here. Let's build these structures and we'll get 7 days together, or whatever he's thinking. And we can ask him questions. We can talk to him. We can find out about the old days. Man, I'd just love to be able to write all of this down. But God says, this is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him. I think there's a significance there, because God's saying, yes, Moses had a great part, and his part was very important. Elijah was a great man, a wonderful prophet. You could learn a lot from him. But what I really want you to hear is Jesus. I want you to listen to him. I want you to hear him. And then it says in verse 36, when the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. When you think about this and you think about what just happened, if I was to meet somebody important, somebody that I respected, that I thought a lot of, and I saw that person and met them and talked to them, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to go tell everybody I know, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to drop names. I'm going to say, man, you won't believe who I met. I got to talk to this person. This was so exciting. Can you imagine not being able to say anything? To being told, don't tell anybody until after the resurrection, which is what we see when we read in Matthew. So Jesus tells them, wait until that time to tell what's happened. Now, it says that Jesus was so glowing, bright. It was like lightning. How do you feel like Peter, James, and John would look when they came down out of that mountain? Not physically as far as the brightness, but just in the sense of, have you ever seen somebody that just looked like the cat that just got the mouse? You just can't wipe that smile off of their face, and I can imagine that Peter, James, and John probably had either a look of bewilderment or maybe a smile they couldn't wipe off their face, but excitement. I can imagine that they were definitely anxious to share what had just happened, but trying to hold it all in. And I can imagine also that the other apostles were like, okay, what just happened? Tell us, come on, give us the details, share with us what happened. And I would imagine that would have been very hard to have kept it all to themselves. But why did Luke record this story? I think there's a very specific reason that Luke would record it. Not only did we see two characters that had significance of the old law, the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, and a prophet, and the introduction of the law, the old law through Moses. There's some significance to all of that. And there's probably some significance to who was there. That Peter, James, and John, Jesus, Elijah, and Moses, there's probably some significance in all of that. But I believe the reason that Luke would record this for us is because he wanted us to see something of all of the things that have happened in history, of all of the things that will come throughout history. There is one thing that you need to listen to. There's one thing that you really need to hear, and this is it. Listen to my son. Hear what he has to say. He is the answer. He's the one that's bringing to us salvation. It's not Moses. He was a great man. He brought the law, but he's not the one that's bringing salvation. Elijah was a wonderful prophet and did many, many miracles, but he's not the one that's delivering you. And we could say that about any Old Testament character, anyone who had lived before and anyone that lived after. Their significance is that they point to Jesus. And so God tells them the very important message, listen to my son. Sometimes we get caught up listening to things of this world, things of other people, things that people get excited about. Even football or baseball. We get excited about stuff like that, and we get busy talking about those things. And there's nothing wrong with those. I'm not saying anything against them, but what if that's all we do? That's where our focus is. That's where our attention is. And Jesus says, or God says, listen to my son. Hear him. Listen to what he has to say. Sometimes we get distracted by the world. But I believe Luke is calling us back and saying, there's something very important here that I want you to hear. When I look at that, I feel like, what is the message of old? What are the things that we should be listening to, that we should be hearing? We were talking during the break about the Exodus from Egypt, and how when you go back and you read that and you see these people making mistake after mistake after mistake, and God forgiving them, bringing them back, and Jeff and I were talking about how, you think to yourself, man, how can you do that? How can you keep making that same mistake over and over again? And kind of the idea that God is full of grace, full of mercy, full of understanding and love. And Jeff said, I can't believe how many times God shows how much he loves them, how much he cares about them by bringing them back into the fold. That's the story of us too. We think about that, and I think about it and think to myself, how can they do that? How can they keep doing these things? But then I look at myself and I see that I fail. I make mistakes. I fall back into my old ways. I have a tendency to be critical and judgmental, or I have a tendency to say or do things that I shouldn't do or say. And I think to myself, how come I keep falling back into those old ways? That's human nature. But God's love, his grace, his mercy, poured out upon us, gives us the ability to stand before him. And that's why he says, listen to my son. This is the message that he has. Nothing else in history. All of the sacrifices, all of the laws, all of the regulations of the old, none of that. The miracles, the things they did, none of that saved us. But Jesus Christ saves us through his death, burial, and resurrection. This morning, I guess my challenge to you is this. If his word is so important, if his word is something that we should be listening to, how can we make it important in our lives? How can we make it a part of our daily walk so that we become more like him? And listen to him, hear him, make time for Jesus to speak to us, to help us.